Hi there, this is Dylan from British English Coach, and I'm here to help you take your English to the next level. So in this short video, I'm going to talk a little bit about functional language. What is functional language, you ask? Well, if I ask the question, what is the function of language? I think most of us would agree that the function of language is to communicate. Communication is the key here. Now, when we communicate, or before we say something, we think, what's my purpose? What's the reason for communicating here? What do I want to achieve from the sentence or the words that I'm going to use? So we do this even as babies, before we can even speak actually. When a baby cries, it's trying to communicate a purpose. It's trying to inform its mother or its father that it's hungry. So that's its purpose, to express hunger. So we always have a reason for communicating. We always have a purpose. And identifying that purpose can really help us when we're speaking in a second language. Now, one way to consider communication and the purposes of our communication is to think about microfunctions. Now, micro, as I'm sure you know, means small. And you know what function means. So we need to think, what do I want to do with my words? So let's say, for example, someone said something and I think what they said made sense. So I want to show them, to express that I agree with what they were saying. So here my micro function is agreeing. Now, on the other hand, maybe they said something and I don't think what they said had much logic. So in this way, I want to disagree. So my micro function here is disagreeing. So microfunctions are things like agreeing, disagreeing, giving opinions, asking people for opinions, expressing anger, expressing fear, expressing happiness, expressing excitement, requesting help, checking understanding, confirming we have understood, offering help, making suggestions. All these things are microfunctions. And as you've probably noticed, they all really consist of a verb like agree, suggest, give advice. And we often use the ing form, agreeing, disagreeing, giving advice, etc. So we need to think in terms of microfunctions when we communicate. What do we want to do with the words? Another way of looking at these microfunctions is to say they're speech acts. So I want to perform, I want to do something with the language. So for example, I want to agree. And once I've decided I want to agree, I should think, okay, what should I say in this situation? Is there a phrase I can use to show that I agree? And of course, when we agree, there are lots of phrases like, I agree, I completely agree, I totally agree, I agree up to a point, or things like exactly, absolutely, or even phrases such as, you've hit the nail on the head. So these are all phrases that we can use when we want to perform a communicative function, a microfunction. Now, when we've decided on the function and we've got to think about the phrases we want to use, one thing we should really consider as well is our register. Now, by register, basically I mean, do I want to communicate in a formal way? Do I want to communicate in a neutral way? Or do I want to communicate in an informal way? So let's say another function could be when we meet someone for the first time and we've got to greet them or to introduce ourselves or to show we're happy to meet them. So in an informal situation, for example, my friend in a bar has introduced me to one of his friends, I could just say, all right, John. Very informal, very common in British English just to say, all right, that's enough. A more neutral phrase, which we could use in lots of situations, would be something like, nice to meet you, or pleased to meet you, or I'm happy to meet you. Something like that is much more neutral and probably much more flexible. But if I were introduced to someone like the Queen at a party at Buckingham Palace, I wouldn't say, "All right, Your Majesty, nice to meet you, Queen." I'd probably say something like, "It's a pleasure to meet you, Your Majesty," or "It's a great honour to meet you, Your Majesty." So I would use a much more formal phrase. Okay, so that's something we need to think about. Do we want to communicate in a formal, a neutral, or an informal way in this social situation? Now, as well as the register, there are other things we need to take into consideration. For example, the setting. Where are we? The language we use in a bar or a cafe or a party might be very different to the language we use at a conference or a business meeting or an interview. Now, we also need to think about the topic. What are we talking about? When we give our opinion about something which isn't so important, such as sport or cinema, or we're gossiping about someone, we might use a different phrase to the language we would use with a more important topic, such as something related to work, something related to politics, something related to maybe sickness or health. So we need to think about the topic and what's appropriate or suitable in that particular topic. Now, we've also got to think about who we're speaking with, the social relationship. So we might use a different phrase when we're talking to our boss to when we're talking to a girlfriend or boyfriend or a good friend or a member of our family. What's the social relationship between us? We've really got to consider that. And also, we've got to think about how we feel in this situation. We might want to express our emotion. We might want to express our emotional attitude or psychological attitude about the topic, about the situation, or about the person we're speaking to. Sometimes we may not actually like that person, so we want to express this dislike or discomfort, and we might use a particular phrase to show that we're not comfortable talking to this person, to show the person that maybe we don't want to talk to them anymore and we'd like to leave this social interaction. Okay, so we've got to think about the setting, where, the topic, what are we talking about, who, the social relationship we have with this person, and our psychological or emotional attitude, because we are emotional people, and so we want to express our emotions and our feelings. And what it really comes down to is what is appropriate in this situation and what is inappropriate in this situation. And sometimes we might actually want to use inappropriate language to show we're not comfortable, or we don't like the person, or we don't like the situation or the topic we're talking about. Okay, so it does get quite complicated. Now, maybe you shouldn't think about this too much. You've got to think really about how good you are in social situations in your own language. Now, in my experience, people who are socially good in one language or in their own society are often quite good at social situations when they're speaking in a second language. But there are cultural differences which we may have to consider. I think the important thing is we need to just try things, and we need to reflect upon whether they were successful or not so successful. And if they weren't so successful, what can we do next time? What can we try next time in order to have more success in our social interactions? So just to quickly review, I've been talking in this video about functional language and microfunctions, such as agreeing, giving opinions, expressing anger, happiness, checking, understanding, etc. And we often have a number of phrases we use when we want to communicate our purposes when we're expressing these microfunctions. And we need to think about formal language, informal language, and neutral language, and things like where are we, what are we talking about, who are we talking with, and what do we feel in this situation. There's quite a lot really to think about. And so that's why it's really important to learn about these functional phrases as well as grammar, vocabulary, pronunciation. They really help you develop your speaking skills. You become a much more successful communicator if you focus on these microfunctions. Okay, so I hope you found that useful. My name is Dylan, and please go to my website at www.britishenglishcoach.com. I also have a podcast which you might enjoy listening to. So I hope to speak to you soon. Take care of yourself, and good luck in taking your English to the next level.